the question here, I think, is challenging the assumption that improvements have to be projects. Projects are usually really big, team-based, relatively complex improvement activities. One way to get things started after training with leadership engagement is encouraging people to start small. Right. A lot of times people will brainstorm big problems, big solutions, build us a better parking garage, and leaders can try to redirect people to point out small problems that hopefully have small solutions. And I think that's as proven as any proven strategy would get. Encourage people to focus on the small things to get started.
And things that they have influence. So things that are in their 10 feet of where they work are a great place to start. And that's not to say that all improvement are going to be what sometimes are referred to as just do it's. That's not to say that some things aren't going to maybe take a week or 2 weeks to do. And that's not to say that some things really do take multiple years. I mean, you think about a master plan on building a campus, for instance. I mean, that might take a decade.
Right.
The question is the frontline worker best suited to get involved in something like that, or best suited to work on something that really kind of creates that power of habit loop that Duhigg refers to? So they kind of get that immediate, oh, I used to spend every day an extra 5 minutes looking for a file. I decided to restructure my files on my computer that made it simpler. I'm just making up an example, but they kind of get that habit right away.
Yeah, and I think the best way to build the habit, to build participation, is to start small, and then people can work their way up to doing A3s, rapid improvement events, projects. There's a role and a time and a place for all of those modes of improvement, I would say. But I think starting small, from the standpoint of psychology, brain science, other sources we could point to, says start small.
And what I think is interesting about this, Mark, is that this question talks about proven strategies to get really some initial suggestions of what I was inferring in this question. And I said it partially in the first answer, but when I started to engage our emergency department residents with Kaizen improvements and Kaizen-minded thinking, I just said, what frustrates you at work? Because we all can think of the last shift or the last day at work where something frustrated them. And like, great, well, let's talk about that and see if we can study that to figure out a small change that we can make. I think that's a great place. So in our experience, if the leadership is creating an inviting culture, then the problem isn't going to be that initial, because almost all employees want to engage if they feel safe in making their work easier. And so then it becomes an issue of, okay, how do we handle that initial influx, which we almost always see when we're looking at improvement curves? There's that kind of bolus in the first month, and then you kind of get more into a steady state. So I think that's a more interesting question to address at times when you're thinking kind of in your first 30 to 90 days.
Yeah, and I agree with you. What I hear you saying is, leaders focusing on what they can do or what they need to do. The question, not to make the questioner feel bad for how they phrased it, but it says, what are the strategies to get staff to participate? Often there's an implication, maybe it wasn't meant here. The implication is the problem is the staff. Why aren't staff participating, as in what's wrong with them? Now, I think if we ask why aren't staff participating, and there's great advice from Bruce Hamilton from the GBMP, who says, hey, if you had a suggestion box system that failed, don't blame the workers, look at the system. Others might say, look in the mirror and say, and ask, what are the barriers? Is it fear? Is it futility? As gosh, I'm blanking on the name. The professor from UT Austin.
David Yeager.
No, different professor.
The other professor.
I'm gonna. Sorry for the dead air. But he, wrote in Harvard Business Review that we often talk about fear of, as a reason for not speaking up. But his research shows that it's futility, that people just
Right.
don't think it's worth the effort. And I feel terrible here. Can your employees speak freely is the name of the article from
Ethan
HBR.
Burris.
Ethan Burris. Highly recommended, even though, but maybe that's why I'm sipping on coffee to avoid an afternoon brain cramp, and that didn't work. But fear and futility, I think, are some of the things that, again, leaders can help address.
It's funny, we sent our lab we got a lab from a lab rescue organization, which put us through the ringer, which is a side story. You would have thought we were adopting a child. Regardless, they build the dog is probably about a year and a half. I think now in retrospect it was probably about 8 months. The dog was kind of crazy at the beginning. We went to and didn't have we didn't have time, right? So listen to all the mistakes, kind of, right? So we outsourced the dog going to a boot camp, and really what we ended up learning, the dog came back well trained. But then we needed 6 sessions because it was really about us learning how to train a dog. I mean, the dog will react a certain way. And so it ends up always being, how do you get staff to do something? Well, the real issue is how do you lead in such a way that encourages that behavior? And so I think that even can apply to how to, not that frontline employees are dogs, but I think you get my point.
I do.